Everyone, we just want to give a few more minutes for people to make their way into their Zoom room. It's beautiful to see your faces across my screen. And we hope this is going to be time well spent together. So just a few more minutes and then we will be kicked off by Jay Williams, who will introduce Moraima Gutierrez, who's the current chair of the LEF, the Latino Endowment Fund. We're up to 41 participants. Moraima, shake your head if you want to start. Oh, I can't hear you. Okay, sounds good. Jay, do you want to introduce? Well, good evening, everyone. First of all, thank you again for joining us. We're going to get started. I just first like to introduce myself. My name is Yvette Bello. I am the staff person assigned to the Latino Endowment Fund. Just want to acknowledge everybody in the room. The Hartford Foundation staff are sprinkled among us, but my counterpart in the development part of the foundation is Sue Dana, who's also here. Hi, Sue. She's waving. And so without further ado, I'd like to just share the stage, if you will, with Jay Williams so he can welcome us and open us up for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvette. Good evening. Good to see everyone. We certainly appreciate the opportunity to see you in these tumultuous times. Although we are gathering virtually, we do very much recall very fondly the days that we were able to gather together in person, both to share one another's company, to always enjoy the good food that comes along with the gatherings, but most importantly, to really celebrate the philanthropy that has been such a part of the Latino Endowment Fund for every year that it has been in existence. It was 17 years ago that Marilda Gandara, and former president and director of the Aetna Foundation, and Rosada Rosario, who is a consultant and former Hartford Foundation board member, founded the Latino Endowment Fund. And the original and current members continue to hope to inspire the Latino community, who are traditionally a very generous people, to expand personal philanthropy by becoming long-term endowment donors through this fund. And we have a very, very capable leader of LEF who is supported by the steering committee members, George Casanovas, Mr. Thomas Blake, Delpha DiGiacomo, Christina Gellum, Evelyn LaFontaine, Rosada Morales Rosario, and Ilka Torres. And Moraima Gutierrez has been, again, such a voice, a force to be reckoned with when it comes to the issues that are most important to the Latino community. And we certainly don't take for granted the relationship that we have as the Hartford Foundation. We are planning some very exciting things that we will look forward to sharing with you in the next couple of weeks. And hopefully it will continue to add to the momentum that you all have established as a very generous and philanthropic group. So that being said, it's a special evening. We have a special guest as LEF is leading in a time of uncertain times and time for action. So I will decrease and introduce Moraima Gutierrez, who is the leader of the Latino Endowment Fund. Moraima?
Hello. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay. Hi, good evening. And I apologize because of the weather, I'm having technical issues right when the meeting's about to begin. So thank you. Thank you for that lovely intro, Jay. I'm going to do my best despite these technical issues. But anyway, tonight's a special night, right? We're celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month. It's just about, it's about to end in the next 3 days, but nevertheless, we definitely wanted to come together as the Latino Endowment Fund, as a community, and put together a nice presentation for you this evening. And as chair of the Latino Endowment Fund, I'm pleased to welcome everyone that registered this evening. We have quite a great amount of folks that registered. And, we welcome you to celebrate, this evening. We're thrilled to welcome Dr. Maysa Akbar, Dr. Maysa Akbar is a Connecticut resident. So we're always thrilled when we can showcase our local talent, right? So as our keynote speaker, she's going to talk a little bit about the power of culture and community to heal and rise from adversity. We chose this topic and discussion for many reasons, right? They're unquestionably challenging and in certain times for all, but particularly for Latinos. We need to lead this discussion around dismantling structural racism that is taking place right now. We need to act, our voices need to be heard. The race-based stress that we endure due to the lack of consideration and disconnection of reality. And sometimes it's the refusal of acceptance of Latinos and our connections to this American society, right? The cultural competency is another issue. I feel sometimes that this training is not only needed in the workplace, but it's also needed nationally as a society. And so, the racial coded language that continues to be used using the term minority, when in reality, we are the majority. Our numbers don't lie. So with all that being said, just a little bit about the Latino Endowment Fund, its mission of advancing social, economic, educational, and leadership development of the Latino community through collaborative giving is a critical vehicle for us to lead through change. And we've been doing that at the Latino Endowment Fund for 17 years now. So if you're already a member of the Latino Endowment Fund, thank you. And if not, please consider joining. Our collective voices can be so much stronger. So that being said, I wanted to introduce Dr. Maysa Akbar, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about her because Dr. Akbar is a groundbreaking psychologist. She's a best-selling author and a healer. Her work in defining the existence of urban trauma, a framework which was developed by Dr. Akbar, unpacks how people of color in a state of crisis due to oppressive societal systems resulting in feelings of anger, rage, and hopelessness. Dr. Akbar is also a board certified clinical psychologist and an assistant clinical professor at Yale University School of Medicine, a media expert addressing the role of urban trauma and community tensions and violence, race, relations, and educational disparities. Dr. Akbar represents the American Psychological Association at the United Nations, where she performs psychology practice within the international community. And Dr. Akbar serves on the board of Connecticut Psychological Association and the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven. So without further ado, I'd like to hand the reins over to Dr. Akbar, who is our guest speaker for this evening.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I feel like I am among friends. I love spending time with you guys. It's probably one of my favorite things to do. And I've been fortunate enough to spend time at the foundation at a variety of different levels. I'm very excited to talk to you about a topic that's near and dear to my heart in celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time kind of setting the tone for today and making sure that we are focused on our conversation. But I also want to express an invitation that we want to make today's discussion collaborative. We want to invite your voice into this discussion. And part of the strategy time that we had together as a group, especially, with the key folks of LEF, was really discussing how to engage the community in a more meaningful conversation. So I hope that we can achieve that today. I am proud to lead this conversation in so many different ways, not only because I'm a proud Dominican that has a lot of intersectionalities in her identity, but because this is a conversation that I think is past due and that needs to happen. So I'm going to, hopefully technology cooperates. I'm going to share my screen, and thank you so much for your patience in case anything goes wrong. All right, let me go into present mode. Can I get a thumbs up, Yvette, if you can see that? Yeah, awesome. Okay, good.
So we're gonna get started. Yvette, I see you on my screen. So while I will be looking at the clock, I know that we have a time limitations. So you can do like the traditional, like cut it out and I will, or help no stop. And I will definitely understand the nonverbals of what that means. So today, Prosperar, Despertar y Unidad are going to be the topics of our conversation. Sometimes my page gets stuck, so let's just be patient with it here. Oh, it went really far. Okay. What do we want to cover? I thought that, you know, thinking about 2020, because it doesn't stop surprising me, I actually stopped saying, what else could 2020, you know, offer? Because every time I said that, something new occurred. So I just kept those comments to myself. I felt like the universe was like, oh, Maysa, you want to know what else? And then it brought me something that I was like, oh, wasn't thinking of that. So I thought, like, you know, staying in theme of 2020, it's looking at this from the perspective of multi-layers, right? Like, what would have been the challenges for 2020? What does it mean to have 2020 vision when we're looking at things that can be challenging? Is it difficult to get 2020, you know, that accuracy in terms of how we view things in the midst of turmoil? Is there possibility for that? Is there opportunity? Is there an opening for that? How can we come together in 2020 when social distancing is the rule, not the exception anymore? And can there be community that is still built? Since now Zoom has become part of my vocabulary, I'll Zoom you. Zoom me later. Let's Zoom together, you know? And so this is the new way, the new language, and the way that we connect with one another. And is there possibility to look at 2020 and beyond? And how can we create vision in a time where it feels like we're barely scraping out of a, out of a hole that seems never ending? So I want to just contextualize that and have conversation about what that can look. Part of that conversation is going to happen later on in some breakout rooms that are going to be facilitated by some pretty amazing people. And we're going to challenge you to think about some questions that are important to the Latino community and to, communities that are needing to come together in a time where the society is more divisive than ever. So let's start with the challenges. Listen, I don't need to talk to you guys about COVID and what the impact has been to the Latinx community, to the Latino community, but also to the indigenous community. Happy to see that yesterday there was much more vocal, resounding, claim for Indigenous Day versus any other day. But along with that is an acknowledgement that in terms of COVID exposure, the indigenous community far outweighs any other community at this time. And, trailing right behind that and very significantly having to look at the health disparities of the Black community, the African-American community. And again, right behind that is the Latino community. And what we're looking at, right, it's not that we don't know that communities of color are not being affected, but it's the significant disparity in that level of being affected, right? Like, I'm highlighting, of course, the Latino community because that's our conversation today, but see the difference, 4 times that of the white community. You're talking about Latinos being infected, with the Black community being anywhere between 5 to 6 times, and the indigenous community 6 to 7 times more likely. And this is even more disparate in terms of deaths. So it's not just the infection rate of COVID, it's also the impact to death, the death to families and loved ones and community members, and the suffering and grief and pain that comes along with that. So, starting off right at the beginning of March, COVID has been relentless in terms of the health impact and what it demonstrated to us. especially in the Latinx community, is that there is a significant disproportionate amount of Latinos that have been impacted and that are unable to access the right type of health care in order to improve their conditions, right? So we knew this before, we understood that those variables were there. This has been particularly highlighted. And in fact, there was a article that came out in the Wall Street Journal that talked about what were the 3 major issues that are on the minds of Latinos, especially this being an election year. Healthcare was number 1, lack of access to healthcare, disparities against healthcare was the number 1 thing. And for beyond that, the second area that was of significant concern was economics. And I'm gonna, as soon as my screen decides to cooperate, I'm going to talk about the economic impact. What we do see was that 72% of Latino households are facing a serious financial problem. At this moment, you're seeing that from pay cuts that are happening, layoffs, furloughs, the lack of inadequate savings for times like this, because that just wasn't doable. Many families are living paycheck to paycheck. And now that the housing rules in terms of evictions and the such have now reinstituted, you're seeing a larger representation of Latino families facing a housing crisis. Not to mention food deserts and other areas that have significantly communities. 63% have reported losing their jobs. That's an incredible number. That if you look at the time of COVID, 63%, that's more than 1 in 2 people are losing employment at this time, right? 87% have reported a deep financial instability. So even if they didn't lose their jobs, the idea that financial stability is something that they can feel comfortable with during this time it's not an area that doesn't have severe concern for most Latinos. And and also the conversation around the undocumented community, being excluded from any financial assistance or stimulus check money, having to pay out of pocket for COVID treatment because lack of health insurance. And despite all of the studies showing that the majority pay taxes, there has been no reciprocity in terms of supporting Latino families during this time. So what COVID has done was clearly identify that health disparities are significant, up close and personal for the Latino community. It also made us a captive audience to seeing how quickly the financial unrest for many Latinos came once things shut down and the majority of jobs that were available for Latinos to work in now became something that was restricted and that many companies and small businesses even closed. So let me go back here. So where did that leave many in the Latino community? Well, some living conditions were, of course, impacted by that. You started to see, especially with COVID, that the areas that tended to be densely populated or overcrowded, especially with multiple generations living in one small space, that's where you saw the increased incidence of COVID. You started to see what housing segregation really did and has done historically in the Latinx community, different hazards and environmental pollutions, lack of reliable transportation to get to and from jobs. But look at the work circumstances. What we understood in terms of the data was that more than likely, most Latinos did not have sick leave. So if they did get sick, there was no opportunity for them to take leave with any payment still coming in. the majority of Latinos also were represented as essential workers. And so they in order for them to feed their families and to continue making sure that they were taking care of their households, they had to work throughout COVID. You saw that there were issues in terms of joblessness, like I spoke about before, and that some who were working under the table resulted in more exposure and less stability. Overall, what we're seeing is that in terms of the Latino community, we are facing an issue in terms of accumulated wealth over time. That's going to be an area that we discuss today. What does it mean to have stability, and how do we build wealth over generations? What we saw when I mentioned the uninsured piece is that three times more Latinos were less likely to be uninsured, unable to see a doctor, and there were significant language barriers that affected their capacity to be able to communicate even with doctors when they needed to. There's also a significant distrust of healthcare and the cultural considerations in terms of, some things that may be described as symptoms. I remember when I was a fellow at Yale and I used to do, I used to follow patients, some of the docs would get really frustrated on the medical floors because, when a Latino family would come in, first of all, it was like 4 generations that came in at the same time. It wasn't just one person, and that's really cultural, right? If abuela's there and tia's there, and there are some other people that are going to be listening to the various ways in which you're diagnosed, sure, there's going to be a lot of family members that may come to one doctor's appointment. Second, you may see that it's a child who's translating for the family, as opposed to the family being able to clearly communicate with the doc. And one of the things that I would support the physicians in understanding is that before we actually got to the medical problem, there were about 7 ailments that came first. It was like a headache, and my hip hurt, and my elbow's not doing too well. And so there were all these other, ailments, or, me duele aquí o me duele allá, that then got, if you asked the right questions, then finally you were able to get the right answer in terms of the diagnostic formulation. So there's a different way in which those questions need to be asked in terms of medical complexity. So those are some of the areas that were distinctly highlighted during this time, and that we have had to really think about. So then what does that mean, right? Like, this moment where we are often captive in our own homes. Many of us are dealing with, teaching our children from home, and maybe a hybrid model. Many of us are working from home or having to go into our jobs. It definitely allows for a time of reflection, and at minimum, feeling extremely overwhelmed. So when we are overwhelmed in this way, as a psychologist, what I know is that being overwhelmed and stressed does not allow you to think clearly. It doesn't allow you to plan well. Instead, what it does is that it makes you very reactive, and your body very reactive. So I want to start thinking about, what does that mean for us as we are considering these unprecedented times, right? We've been a captive audience to racial unrest. And, we have seen that many Latino communities have stood up and have denounced anti-Black racism, that they have stood together with many of the Black communities who are fighting for racial justice in this country. We also see that there are many issues that are going on within the Latinx community that need attention as well. And one of the things that we have to look at is, what does it mean for the political climate to continue to publicly dehumanize the Latinx community. You know, what does it mean when white supremacy is not denounced? What does it mean when there's an incitement of violence because of the way that many Latinx communities are portrayed as, you know, drug dealers and rapists and the such, right? What kind of message is being processed when things like that are based on bigotry and hatred are announced? The issues that are happening in detention centers and the maltreatment of border families and how that issue has not been resolved. I was actually in a task force a couple of months ago where we were discussing as psychologists that one of the issues that was happening is that if a border family was in therapy with a mental health provider, the Border Patrol was accessing those private confidential notes from that therapy session and utilizing that as leverage to deport the families. And so we had to take, as an association, we had to take a very strong stance around the rule of confidentiality, and that access to personal health information was not allowed. And that we have certain criteria by which we break confidentiality. That maltreatment continues. And if you look at my fourth bullet, with recent allegations now that hysterectomies were being performed without the consent of women in many of the border facilities. There have been multiple attempts to gut the DACA program, and very small wins along the way related to that program. Increased media coverage in terms of police brutality, more so Black men and women, but there are several cases of also Latinx men and women who have experienced the same mistreatment, and race-based violence that are targeted communities of color are certainly at a rise. So these are other issues that now that we are a captive audience, we're having to contend with these multi-layer of issues that are happening in our society and needing to make some decisions about how we are going to proactively come together as a community and manage those issues around racial unrest. So one of the most important things that I think is characteristic to many communities of color, but in particular the diversity that exists within the Latino community, is turning tragedy into triumph. So let's consider this, right? What are some of the challenges? Identifying those challenges that are being experienced right now and that have historically been experienced allows us to problem solve and make decisions about how we're going to move forward. So we see that for income challenges, which is an area that we're going to talk about today from the perspective of being proactive, in terms of unemployment, that has been a historical issue with, you know, and you see the data around that. The wealth gap is unbelievable. The net of a white family in this country is $171,000, and the average wealth of a Latinx family, of a Latino family, is $20,000. You see that in terms of education, there's often more than a 21-point difference in math and 25-point difference in reading between Latino children and their white counterparts. And in terms of housing, 27% point difference in terms of home ownership. And when you start to think about, there have been studies after studies that demonstrate that the clear pathway out of poverty into the middle class there are two major and important aspects that need to be attained: higher level education and home ownership. And at the point that you're able to do that, there is a clear pathway into the middle class. And I'm sure that if I sat here and I asked all of you in this audience, tell me your story, who are you today and how did you get there, you're going to talk about either education or some type of home ownership in terms of creating wealth for your family and the legacy that you will leave behind for your children. The other area that we're going to focus on today is leadership. Have we historically, and are we now leading the charge of the issues that are happening in our communities, right? So in terms of health disparity, which I demonstrated to you, were blatantly obvious during the COVID crisis and continue to be. What are we doing to take charge then when we know that 2 times more Latinx people, Latino people will die from COVID than any other, right? What are we doing when we see the disproportionality in terms of policing, right? 1.5 more Latino men will be likely to be shot by police than a white male. And in terms of the criminal justice system, how are we leading policy changes around criminal justice where 1 in 6 Latino male will go to prison in their lifetime? 1 in 6, okay? That's not short of, this statistic for Black men is 1 in 3. So what we're seeing is that there is a pattern here that needs to be broken, and there's clear leadership that is needed in order to disrupt these systems that have functioned under the guise of systemic racism. But what about unity? Are we united enough to be able to carry the charge of leadership? Are we united enough to be able to teach our communities and our families about generational wealth? Well, let's think about this. 2,000 children are lost and 1,000 families separated in detention centers since 2019, right? Although, like Moraima indicated, we are the largest minority in this country, what you tend to see is that the maltreatment of incoming immigrants is very significant, and the separation of children from their families are causing an additional traumatic event that sometimes most psychologists will say that those children will have this traumatic experience that they will carry through their lifetime. What about colorism? How have we dealt with colorism in our community? Whether you're mestizo, negro, blanco, however you identify, right? How have we dealt with the idea of white supremacy, racism, and the maintenance of anti-Blackness in the community? How have we dealt with our identification of being in alignment with colonizers versus being in alignment with the origin of where our true culture has come from? And a current statistic that came out from a Pew study indicated that currently, out of the almost 60,000 Latinos in this country, 2.5 million of them are now identifying as white. What does that mean in terms of the way that then we are coming together or not in terms of unity of who we are and how we identify? What about politics? The party line division. There are 32 million Latinos who are eligible to vote. In fact, the largest group of eligible voters. What does that mean when I say that to you? The largest group of eligible voters. 1 in 4 are predicted to vote for the current president. 1 in 4. There's a lot of work we need to do. And so this allows us to have vision, clarity, purpose, understanding of how we're going to move forward. I wanted to lay the groundwork with these statistics, and I know that they can be dense, but they're necessary because they create a baseline on how we want to choose to move forward. So I wanted to show you this because it's the most, I've seen this video a couple times, and to me, it shows our collective strength and how well we can turn tragedy into triumph.
To offer you a different kind of speech. one that discusses expectations versus reality. Many of you see me standing up here and assume that my life must be pretty great. My parents must be very proud. Nevertheless, I think it's important to note that those are only half truths. Those are the expectations. My reality has been quite different. On July 11th, it will be exactly 6 years since I moved to McKinney from Mexico City, where I was born and raised. When people see me standing up here, they see a girl who's bound and who seems to have her life figured out. But that is far from the whole truth. So at this time, if I may, I'd like to convey my fair share of realities. Unexpected reality number one. At the age of 11, I was nothing more than the girl with an abusive and alcoholic father who had to depend on her mother's strength. A girl whose only dream was to someday become an American. A naive girl who thought that moving countries would solve all of the problems in her life. Unexpected reality number two. At the age of 12, I was faced with the task of having to embrace and fit into a new culture. Oftentimes, my intelligence was questioned due to my background. I was also faced with the task of giving up a part of my childhood to help raise my little sister, Andrea, while my mom worked from morning until late at night. School became my safe haven because despite not having internet, a washing machine, or even my own bed, I always had knowledge at my fingertips thanks to the library at my school. And not only that, but I also realized that that might be the only way I might be able to help my family. Although we do not all share the same struggles and we haven't gone through the same hurdles throughout life, we do share some of the same sentiments. I know what it's like to be put down, to have your accomplishments and acknowledged, to feel powerless. So at this time, I would like to commend each and every single one of you here for persevering through your own challenges, for being the resilient human beings you have proven to be, and for not letting any obstacles stop you from getting here today. We all have struggles we want to face on our own behind closed doors because we know that if people were to discover them, we would be at our most vulnerable state and never looked at the same way. Well, after all of these years, I have finally mustered up the courage to stand before you and share a struggle I've had to deal with each and every day. Unexpected reality number three. I am one of the 11 million undocumented immigrants living in the shadows of the United States. I decided to stand before you today and reveal these unexpected realities because this might be my only chance to convey the truth to all of you that undocumented immigrants are people too. I was hesitant to speak about this here today because of the great divide of opinions concerning the topic of immigration in America. But I feel like I owe it to all of you to be honest, and I owe it to myself. The most important part of the debate, and the part most often overlooked, is the fact that immigrants, undocumented or otherwise, are people too. People with dreams, aspirations, hopes, and loved ones. People like me. People who have become a part of the American society and way of life, and who yearn to help make America great again, without the construction of a wall built on hatred and prejudice. We are here without official documentation because the U.S. immigration system is broken and it has forced many families to live in fear. I myself have been waiting 7 years for my application to even be processed. So I hope that all of you leave here today knowing that we are trying to do it the right way, but we don't know how. I ask for all of you to try to look beyond the way in which the media portrays us and the dehumanizing accusations that some politicians have made. I ask for you to please keep your hearts open and try to find love and understanding that makes us human. Because after all, we are people just like you. Well, I can't predict the future and tell you how successful you're all going to be, By sharing my story, I hope to convince all of you that if I was able to break every stereotype based on what I'm classified as, Mexican, female, undocumented, first generation, low income, then so can you. We do not have to let expectations become our reality. I am no expert in this journey we call life, but I am living proof that beating the system is possible. We do not have to conform to the limitations that others put on us. There will always be people that judge us and set expectations based on their preconceived ideas of who they think we are and who they think we should be. However, we have the ability to prove them wrong. In those moments when you need a reason to continue moving forward, close your eyes and picture yourself in the future saying, "They told me I couldn't, so I did."
Thank
Wow.
you. Dr. Akbar, we're about time right now.
Okay. So, I think I'm going to wrap up. I'm wanting to make sure that one of the things that we identify are what are the core values that run through the Latino community. One of the largest diverse groups in the US. Now we know that 1 in 4 children in America are Latinx, and that it represents 17% of the entire workforce. But most importantly, I want you to look at the buying power. $1.5 trillion of buying power. That doesn't mean that you're powerless. That doesn't mean that there isn't opportunity for creating wealth. It just means that the way that it's done needs to be streamlined, and that at least there are 45 Latinx politicians represented. Going back to basics in terms of what makes the culture strong, sense of family, the powerful commitment to diversity in who we are, broadening our sense of family, and becoming significant advocates. I know that the Latino Endowment Fund continues to do this through many initiatives, and it's so important that you're here and part of this conversation. That's why we're inviting you to now take part in our breakout session. So what we're going to do in just a few short minutes is that we're going to divide into a variety of different breakout rooms. Before we do that, I want to make sure that we review the commitments. Yvette and Kayla, you guys will determine who will go where. You will be set in several different, 3 different of the breakout rooms to review our commitments. This is what I'd like you to consider before you go into your breakout room. Lean into this conversation with courage. Stand in this conversation with courageous listening, courageous inclusivity, courageous hope, courageous kindness, courageous sharing, and courageous care. We want you to be courageous enough to have a voice. So the first breakout session is going to be led by Moraima Gutierrez, and this is about leveraging our resilience to achieve economic development and freedom. So there will be questions that will be asked. What is your relationship with money? Are you paying a tax for past and present generations? And what are the primary vehicles to the middle class and generational wealth? You will be discussing that. Moraima will review these questions with you in your breakout session. The second breakout session is about growing leaders, growing, inspiring, and investing in our leaders. And this will be facilitated by Mark Overmeyer Velasquez. What is our responsibility for the next generation of leaders? How can we help to inspire and develop new Latino leaders? And how can we at LEF work with current community leaders to lift voices of the new generation? And the third breakout session will be led by Rosaida Morales Rosario. Here we're talking about Unidad, unity, strengthening unity through racial and ethnic equity. How do you identify racially or ethnically? How do you define Latinidad? Do you see yourself in that definition? And what are the opportunities for unification in the Latino community? Each of these will have a call to action. Each session will ask that there is a reporter and a note taker identified. Yvette, we are ready now to move into the different breakout sessions. Remember, our focus is to identify what's going to be the call to action in each of these areas. So Moraima, who is your reporter for your breakout room focused on Prosperar, leveraging our resilience to achieve economic development and freedom?
Maysa, I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to tell you, I think it was Kayla, but I'm not sure. Yvette, am I accurate? If not, I took notes if it wasn't Kayla. Because I'm working on my phone, Maysa, so my screen is this big. I believe it might have been Kayla. Yvette?
No, I don't think it was me.
Hey, sorry, Kayla.
I think it might have to be your notes, Moraima.
It might have been me then, or was it you, Yvette?
No, I was popping in everywhere.
Okay, I took notes. I took notes. Maysa.
Okay. Unless there's anybody from your group that would love to volunteer and just really express what they thought was a take home, and maybe you could augment. Is there anybody that you love to, like, you know, elevate? I'm not going to say pick on. I'm going to say elevate.
We had a handsome young man that spoke quite a bit. Armando?
Armando, what did you think were the areas of call to action for your group? And here's a call to action question. How do we leverage our collective buying power to create change?
Thank you, Ms. Gutierrez. No, it was a really great conversation. So how do we leverage our buying power to create change? So we talked about three simple things. Oh, excuse me. We talked about three things. One was the value that our community puts on funds and financial literacy. We also talked about our use. An example was I have the privilege of leading a private middle school, free tuition middle school for young men of color here in Hartford. And I still have parents who go cash their checks at check cashing places in 2020. So we talked about the lack of knowledge and the lack of access to resources. Third is exactly what are we doing to encourage and invite our communities to understand, right, how much influence we actually have. So we talked about a sense of belonging, a sense of ownership, and a sense of impact. Our community, we want to belong about something, right? Our culture in itself, right? And I identify as a Latino man, but also African American. I am Puerto Rican, Dominican, and Black. And so for me, you know, all cultures, all background that make me, I always want to belong to something. Right? I want to have that. I want to be able for people to understand, like, he owns and he loves who he is. And then I also want to have an impact. And the third one was ownership, right? I want to be able to own the impact that I have, right? When we cook, right? Let's talk about food, something everybody can relate to. When we cook, if somebody says, man, who made the rice, right? And people start to smile, people take that ownership, like, I made the rice, right? Now, if the rice isn't good, nobody's going to ask who made the rice that loud. It's usually, who made the rice, right? So that was what we talked about. And our buying power, how we leverage our buying power is having the tough conversations, right? Right. We don't talk. I talked about how we talked about salaries versus hourly wages, right? A lot of our community, our family members, oh man, you're earning $10 an hour. That's great, right? Versus saying, like, well, how many vacation days do you have, right? What's your benefits? And so our call to action and the way we leverage our buying power is having tough conversations, but also welcoming and inviting others to educate them through the resources that we have of belonging, impact, and ownership. Ms. Gutierrez, is that good?
I think you did wonderful, Armando. You captured the essence.
Wonderful. So having the tough conversations, meaning that, you know, how do we educate the community in terms of negotiating salaries and what are the benefits, right? Like a full package, not just focusing on the hourly rate, you know, but perhaps longevity, how, you know, promotions, etc. Right? Those things are considered taboo maybe, but need to be discussed. And being welcoming, inviting any other, can you double down on that a little bit more? What does that mean as a call to action? How can you be welcoming and inviting to others? Anybody can jump in from that group.
So welcoming and inviting others, no matter what background. We talked about college, talked about how some of the students and scholars that I'm working with, they're going to be great mechanics, great chefs, great HVAC specialists. You know, maybe college, as much as I love college, I'm a college graduate myself, but college for them may not necessarily mean, you know, may not mean success, right? To go to college and come out potentially with debt and, you know, be in the market with other college folks where, you know, there's folks now who are HVAC specialists, mechanics, who own restaurants, who are doing exceptionally well. And well, in the sense of our community sees financial stability and success through how much money you earn. Excuse me. I personally see from my eyes. I don't want to speak for the entire community.
So Dr. Akbar, I just want to kind of acknowledge the chat. Some are mentioning also in this section just how we sell our services and skills and how we earn based on those skills. You know, someone asked the question about financial literacy also. Just in my guess is that that's a basis of these conversations. And I think we have like about 11 minutes left for this section.
So Yvette, can I add to this? This is Fabiana.
Sure, sure.
So I think what we also, you know, going with financial literacy, we talked a lot about transparency, right? And understanding how the finances work in America. For example, I noticed when I was doing my retirement plan, one of the things that I made an effort is to understand that I was not investing in anything that would harm our community, especially the prison system, you know, with my community of immigrants. So that transparency is not through the board, and a lot of us, even a higher levels job, don't really take the time to look into, am I investing in something that is harming my community? And to what Armando said, right, a sense of belonging and understanding the impact we have, but not just individually, the impact we have in our entire community. You know, if I'm doing good, it's great, but doing good, my means I can harm the community if I don't know how to invest, if I don't know who I am supporting and where I am spending my money on.
Great, thank you. All right, we're gonna move to respaldar. Mark, what did you have a reporter in your group?
We did. We had the amazing Dr. Werkmeister Rosas.
Ay, muchísimas gracias, compadre. Okay.
Tell
So
the truth.
I don't know that I'm going to have the same kind of quick categorical responses as the other person had, but I think that there were a lot of things within the qualities of a leader. I think then one was looking at the cultural aspects, generational aspects, political aspects, and the larger socio-political aspects. And I think, you know, one thing that folks talked about is a genuine desire to help the community, to care for the community, to understand the issues and represent the community. And with that, much more political leadership in the legislature, and I think the broader government structure. I think the idea about partnership and collaboration was also one. How do we bring together multiple communities that are interested in the same kind of moving forward? And I think that included politics, philanthropy, ways that we could influence policy. The importance of curiosity and the ability to agree and disagree, even though it's emotional, but to like hold that within the groups. To really kind of assess the commonality within the various Latinx communities. You know, how do we hold the focus of, you know, what the overarching goals of the Latinx community is, and also understand that leadership is about engagement. So building leaders within our community, understanding that there is a lack of resources and confidence from the educational system and beyond, and to understand how we can bring about instances where people can see people like themselves in leadership roles, and also have the confidence to continue. Service of others was important. Again, the need for leaders to look like you. And I think the generational aspect was really kind of taking into consideration that this generation is now presented with a larger, I mean, it's always been larger, but kind of been more immersed in sort of the Black Lives Matter movement, the police brutality and violence. And that has kind of brought together, you know, other social group identities, and how do we, a leader manages that as well as in terms of bringing it together to bring about greater change, greater societal change. And lastly, the understanding that philanthropy is important, and it should be a tool to be provided for the Latinx community in terms of a resource, and really kind of further explained of its importance to the Latinx community. So that's what I have.
Thank you. All right. Unidad. Rosaida, who's your
Yes,
reporter?
Yes. So we have actually two people. One, Evelyn took notes, but Maggie's going to report for us. And I'm curious to see how this is going to happen when you have two different people. But you asked for that.
I did.
And the other thing is, you know, we just scratched the surface. So, I mean, this is a conversation we're going to have to continue, and everybody can join in at another time. Maggie?
Yes, I took some notes as
good.
well. Hello, Dr. Akbar.
Hi.
I'm working with her on another task force, but so as Rosalia mentioned, we barely scratched the surface. We had an incredible conversation, really just stopping at the whole ethnicity, race question, and it seemed to be a pretty easy question for our Boricuas to answer, because there was, you know, the Caribbean and there was the black box that could be checked. But we really talked about why there is just black, white, or other, or now that they've included black, white, Native American, why are we not included in there? And Stephanie, our millennial in the group, who is Mexicana, yo también, we talked about, and it's funny that she mentioned that, because every time my birth certificate says on it, race is white. And that's just always what I put. But this year, as I was filling out the census, I haven't had to fill out anything that requires that. It was torture for me to, like, because I didn't know of any options. Like, I didn't think about the Native American part, which really doesn't apply. I mean, we are, you know, Azteca, Mayan, whatever, but we don't have that box that we should be given. So then with our call to action, what does it look for Latinos to have a seat on the equity and inclusion table? Someone in our chat, I'm not sure who, brought up a good slogan, which is, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And I know my mantra has always been, si se puede. And I think for me personally, as someone who, you know, serves on a lot of boards, who you know, has a lot of opportunity to share certain opportunities with other people, I think things like this, like I mentioned in our group, this is my first LEF event. I'm familiar with the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving, because they deal with our scholarships for the Hispanic Bar Association. But like, just in thinking of this, I'm thinking, okay, this is a person I would want to approach about maybe whether they want to serve on the board of statewide legal services or something like that. So I think part of that, having a seat at the table, is having those of us that have moved up, drop the ladder down for others, bring them in, be a cohesive unit. Someone had talked about us being a group, making sure that we're a group with a common identity as Latinos, Latinas, Latinx, but not forgetting our history. And that it's important that our children are being educated as to their history. You know, what it means to Boricua, what it means to be Dominican. And then understanding that you have that identity, but you also have a group dynamic that is powerful and that can be used to bring people up. And those were I think the only notes that I have, just including history in the curriculum. Mark brought up in the chat a very disturbing ruling on the census, which is that the Trump administration is going to be closing that down, which is going to be, it's going to have an impact on our communities. We're going to lose a lot of numbers for people who, especially our undocumented population. So I think that there should be a better way for us to be counted. I think our general consensus is that we should empower each other, come together as a unity, and do what we can to bring leaders and bring others with us to positions that we might have available, and make sure that our voice is heard.
Great. And I just want to add, Maysa, that one of the things we did agree on is that we need this conversation on an ongoing basis amongst us as Latinos, so that when we get to the table, we know we need to, who we're reaching back to and pulling up. And I think Christina said there is Christina, where is your?
I'm here if you want me to read it.
Yes, please. I'm trying to find it because now it disappeared in the.
No, that's fine. I got you. So I was just saying that our call to action, we need to be bold in speaking up for those who are not represented and make recommendations that are inclusive. So we might be sitting at tables with people who don't look like us, and we keep saying, well, where are the people who look like us? And we need to stop saying, where are the people who look like us, and start saying, we need to start inviting those people, right? So it's similar to the quote that Kristen Clark put up. And then I also said, you know, the families who walk in the pajamas, who we are always like, why are you out of your house in your pajamas? They have strengths too, and we need to elevate those strengths and support them. And as parent leaders, you know, they're there in their pajamas. Who cares if they're in their pajamas and their roller sets and their hair bonnets? Who cares about that? They are there because they care about their kids. And so we need to start looking at those as strengths and start to elevate those parents and give them the training so that they can build their capacity.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, I'm going to wrap this up. Let's see here. The most important piece of this conversation, thank you, Christina, for kind of teeing it off, is how do you anchor yourself in la cultura, right? In the culture, tapping into the traditions. You know, we're celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, the diversity that comes with that. Like Armando, I too identify as both Black and Latina. And so to me, those are two intersectional identities that are very, very important to me. And things that I'm unwilling to give up and celebrate. And I love my melanin. So there is no way that I want to give any of that up. So I tap into that, you know, as we were talking about how we heal ourselves, tap into the anchor of family, because family is so important, who you surround yourself with. And, you know, everyone loves to get together. I know it's hard to do that now, but there are ways that we can still create community. And I encourage you that as you're thinking about balance and you're thinking about how to honor the culture, you continue to be innovative in the ways that you can anchor in the way that we celebrate together. And lastly, I want to make sure that we leave here with a positive pledge in mind, right? Something that Eva Longoria said that I thought, was so amazing. My mother gave me one piece of advice that stuck with me. She said, don't forget where you came from. And that's what I challenge all of you. Don't forget where you came from. Hey, you may be in a very different place than you were, 5, 10, 20 years ago, but never forget what brought you here. And I always believe in affirmations because they're so important. So I want to leave you with this affirmation before we depart for the night together. I shall no longer allow negative thoughts or feelings to bring me down. I shall no longer allow toxic people to control my happiness. Instead, I will focus on all the good that happens in my life. I will think it, I will feel it, I will speak it. By doing so, I will send out positivity into the world, which will then bring me even more happiness. Thank you for allowing me to share this time. This is community, this is comunidad. I appreciate this time and this conversation that is so meaningful that does not need to end here. You are leaders. You can push this conversation in your organizations, in your communities, and wherever you sit. These conversations are important.
I just want to thank you so much for this part of our presentation. I do want to make space for Nora Brugueras, who we would like to shine a little bit of a light on. Nora is going to share how she has put her philanthropy into action. And I know Kayla, let's see, do we have a presentation that goes along with this? Kayla?
Hi, and no.
Okay, that's fine. What I would like to do then is introduce Nora. She is not only, I believe, a member of the Latino Endowment Fund. If she isn't, I'd love to encourage her to take that step and join the group formally. But Nora will be speaking a little bit about her philanthropic contributions to our community. We are on this very special day. Not only is it a time for us to hear more and discuss and open up conversations that we hope to have all year long in 2021. But Nora, I'd like to introduce you and invite you to speak on your milestone.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me today and to highlight a special day indeed for us, for not only for me, but for my family and the Splash Project. The Splash Project started in 2017. In 2016, my son, Aaron Brugueras Jr., who passed away in a tragic car accident, but left us just so much love and so much drive that I guess in basic terms, we've turned our healing into leadership. And everything that I heard today from the introduction from Jay Williams and Dr. Akbar and Moraima, the importance of having a voice to be able to change our community and to engage our community. It's so important. In 2017, as I stated, we started the Splash Project, attributed to my son, an acronym for Special People, Living and Aiming for Success and Health. He was a local rapper in Hartford, and he was known as Splash. He created a huge fan base in a short time. Shortly after we lost him, we were powerless. We felt powerless. Just as the young lady on the video spoke, when moments like that happen, I think I speak for myself that there was a moment where I wasn't very clear on what my purpose in life was. But then I sat back and I was angry. I was resentful. I mean, everything in the book, there was so many mixed emotions. But then as moments got by, and thanks to my faith, I found a vision, I found clarity, and I found a purpose. And that purpose is not to let go of my son's life go in vain. And the beautiful connections, Yvette Bello was instrumental to me connecting with the Hartford Foundation. We had this huge vision of opening a nonprofit organization, and you guys know how that goes and the work that it takes, and we all have full-time jobs. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you, Yvette, for your guidance and support through all this, because the best thing that we could get started right away in memory and in honor of our son was to start an endowment fund that now today on his birthday would have been his 25th birthday. We were able to grant our first nonprofit organization, Advocacy Unlimited Toivio, who parallels our vision to a comprehensive care of mental health. They offer nutrition, parent support, alternative to treatments, everything that you could think of that it is so imperative to anyone dealing with mental health or anyone in general. I mean, we're in a pandemic right now and we're dealing with issues that we could have never imagined. Professionals like me working from home, supporting our young ones in their schooling, it creates a lot of stress. Resources and organizations like Toivio and Advocacy Unlimited offer these stress management resources to our community at no cost or a very low cost. And this is what we have to do to be able to find our community and find that unity that we talked about. I think and speaking or just thinking about what the video of the young lady who graduated talked about her father who had an alcoholic father. That's also top of the line. That's mental health. These challenges and these barriers are so real for many of us, but it's also a stigma. We can't talk about it. We can't look for resources, but it's, you just have to kind of get through and live by. So no, there is an opportunity for us to kind of find our voice, to bring hope. That's, one of the things that I actually am taking away from this session, this beautiful, beautiful time with you guys all. The Latin Endowment Fund is that, in a sense, to create hope to a community, to build and engage. And that is exactly what we're here for. So I thank you guys for having me and to highlight what today was just a very emotional, but very rewarding day for me and my family. So I encourage you guys to join the Latino Endowment Fund. And for more information, follow us, splashproject.net, and join us in our efforts to be able to support our community, engage, and change the infrastructure of mental health.
Yep. Thank you so much, Nora. And just a shout out to Wanda, who actually counterparted and helped Nora with all the little details, all those details I don't do. So Wanda Woman, as I call you, thank you so much. I know you're here. But I will relinquish the floor to Dr. Akbar for closing remarks.
Thank you. Well, it was such a pleasure to spend time with you all. I hope that we were able to uncover, some of the critical areas that we need to be able to focus on. Time for action is now. I know that for me, my little 15-year-old daughter keeps me on my toes. Like, you can't get lazy, Mom. Let's go. Time is now. And that's what I'm going to give you the message that she gives me. We can't get lazy. Time is now. And I think that this group was very dynamic, and I'm so excited to see what comes out of this conversation, because I think that there's many more topics that we need to discuss and carry on. And I'm so grateful to the Hartford Foundation, not only because of the support of this, but because I have been in so many different meetings that the goal to target and dismantle racism has been at the forefront of every single discussion for every single marginalized community. So thank you. I appreciate you all. I wish you a very good night, and pa'lante. So,
Thank you, everybody. That concludes our meeting, and we look
Thank
forward
you.
to continued conversations through LEF. Good night, everybody.
Good night, and thank
Right.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Akbar.
Buenas
Great
noches.
job.
Good night.
Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Akbar.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Celia.